Hello, Psychomers, and welcome to our October 2024 Mentor Chat. For this Mentor Chat, we will continue the focus on our theme of engagement. Today, we are joined by Dr. Amml Hussein for her presentation on AI-aided artistry, transforming trauma, healing, and social policy for marginalized communities through creative expression. Dr. Hussein is the 2024 Civic Science Fellow at Boston University's College of Communications. And I'm so glad that she can join the Psychommerce for this conversation about how artificial intelligence can influence social policy, um, and how we can use it hopefully for good, to aid in emotional expression and community re-engagement. Um, as with all mentor chats, this is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube in about a week. If you've got any questions during Dr. Hussein's presentation, feel free to put them in the chat until they can be answered afterwards, or you can hold them in your hearts and say them out loud at the end. All right, Amal, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name again is Amml Hussein, and I am the Civic Science Fellow at Boston University. It's a tremendous privilege for me to be here with you today, and we're going to be exploring how we can use cutting-edge AI technology and creativity and innovation to help us revolutionize trauma healing for people. So I'll also highlight the critical role of policy to ensure that we are being equitable with our access to these tools to various communities. And before we dive in, I encourage you to think about your own personal experiences, whether they're personal or whether they're professional, in which healing from trauma or supporting those kinds of issues, painful issues, can be a central concern for you. So keep those experiences in mind as we're going to explore how we can use technology and the arts and combine those two to promote more healing. So I'll move on to our next slide. Ooh, it's not going forward. Okay, our agenda. First, I'm going to walk you through an introduction of this conceptual model where I am pairing AI and the arts with trauma healing. We're secondly going to look at how trauma healing for marginalized groups can help them get in touch with their future post-trauma identity, which can be really difficult to do when somebody has been through a traumatic experience. The third thing we're going to do is walk through a case study, which I had the honor of doing in Newark, New Jersey, where I worked with justice impacted youth, where we piloted this conceptual model of AI, expressive arts, and healing. And then we're going to talk about the implications for social policy and how we can think about some of the harms that could be done and how to navigate those sensitive areas. So that's a little bit of what you can expect from this talk. So in the wake of rising trauma incidents worldwide, particularly with a focus on our marginalized communities, we need to really rethink our approach to healing. So my presentation is going to look at how we can use technology and expressive arts in a way that converges the two to develop some more healing for those who need it the most. So let's establish some context. Trauma is a pervasive issue that impacts both individuals and their families, as well as their communities at the meso level. It transcends borders and ages and demographics, so everybody can be impacted by this phenomena. And trauma can arise from a variety of situations, for example, war, violence, systematic injustice, racial discrimination, all of these things, natural disasters, and so many more can impact someone's experience and cause them to have a very traumatic experience. Its effects are really far-reaching, and they often influence a person's mental, emotional, and physical health for many years. So it's really important that we are careful in the way we approach treatment in this area. And now more than ever, there's a need for us to develop innovative ways to promote that trauma healing. There's technology, specifically when we look at artificial intelligence and the creative arts. how we can use those tools to better understand someone's concept of themselves after post-trauma. And that can complement some of the traditional therapeutic models like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, which may not be as impactful for somebody who has had a serious trauma and is experiencing significant distress from that. So my presentation is going to focus on three key areas. We're going to look at AI's role within that trauma healing space. We're going to secondly look at the use of expressive arts as a therapeutic intervention. And then we're going to talk about policy implications and the ethics that arise when we integrate those tools when we're working with humans. So the impact of trauma impacts not only the mind, but the body as well. And so there's a need for a comprehensive way that we can assess and, develop resources for folks more that to address all of the impacts both on their body and in their mind. So the conceptual model that I developed uses creative arts and expressions to help trauma impacted youth get in touch with their post-trauma identity and their future sense of self. And in that discovery process, there is a lot of healing that takes place both on an individual level with the micro activities that we do with the youth. And then in group and in community, we do some collective efficacy work where they share their artifacts and what they've created using the AI models. And there is some collective healing that takes place with that shared lived experience. So we'll begin with our trauma effects and how it impacts the mind and the body. It can leave individuals feeling in a fight or flight response mode where they constantly feel on edge or detached from their own experiences. It doesn't just impact their mental wellness, it can also lead to chronic illnesses, weakened immune systems, and even shorten their lifespan. So it's really important that we're very careful about that. And when we're thinking about interventions, to be very careful about how we approach that. So what's more is that the trauma is impacting our communities in a inequitable way. So there are structural inequalities that like racism and poverty and discrimination that further impact the way trauma is experienced, and it can exacerbate a lot of the symptoms that a person experiences. So I want to share a few statistics with you regarding the magnitude of this issue. Over 70% of adults worldwide have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. And in the US, it's estimated that 60% of men and 50% of women will experience at least one traumatic event in their life. And this doesn't even account for the complex experiences that are experienced by marginalized communities, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color, who often face both the historical and ongoing trauma. And it is a very systemic oppression that they're experiencing. So given this, it's essential that we acknowledge not only just the trauma that's being experienced, but also we want to look at innovative ways that we can support that healing. And sometimes our traditional models of talk therapy, while they're beneficial and well-intended, it's sometimes not enough to address some of the complex issues that our communities are facing. And so my model kind of takes a holistic approach where we integrate the AI and the expressive arts, and it plays a pivotal role in the healing process. So expressive arts like painting or music and dance are really powerful tools for individuals to reconnect with their identities and the things that are very meaningful to them. And research shows that these therapies foster an emotional expression and psychological resilience within the individual. So expressive art therapies are based on the idea that through that creative expression and visual arts, we can help individuals explore those process a lot of the difficult emotions that they have experienced. So these modalities work by engaging different parts of the brain that verbal therapies alone might not reach. So for trauma survivors, the arts offer a nonverbal and non-threatening outlet for them to express their pain and to be more open to expressing feelings of pain, anguish, sadness, fear, and shame. And when words fail or they're insufficient for you to express those difficult things, it can be really difficult to then move on and to even see yourself beyond the present moment. And so the arts allow people to reconstruct their identity in ways that verbal communication sometimes cannot access. In a study by the American Art Therapy Association, for example, they found that individuals who engaged in art therapy reported reduced symptoms of trauma. They also reported improved mood and increased ability to manage their stress. And so art making and being expressive about those things can create a sense of safety, which then enables that person to express emotions in a way that feels less threatening and less daunting. The effectiveness of those therapies is very clear. However, they are often underutilized in clinical settings, especially within our marginalized communities where we see a lot of barriers to care and access issues. So this is why policy change and innovation are really crucial for us to ensure access to these therapies. And so we will move on to our next slide where we explore some of this work more closely. So I had the honor of working with justice impacted youth in Newark, New Jersey at the Hub, which is Help Us Become Better. That's what the acronym stands for. It's an arts and trauma center. And there we introduced the youth to AI-powered tools to help them really get in touch with their future sense of self. So we use two different platforms, and on the next slide, I will outline some of the theoretical rationale for using these tools and what they represent. And then the expressive arts then help us develop this pathway for developing the resilience of the youth. So two of the theories that are grounded in our work are positive selves theory, and the second one is collective efficacy. So if a person's able to see themselves beyond the trauma that they have experienced, they're able to then have a healing experience and visualize what their future might look like and really rewrite their possibilities through the creative arts. So we first use the future sense of self theory, which posits that individuals are motivated by their visions of themselves and their future selves. And by focusing on those identities, we can engage in behaviors that align our aspirational self with promoting recovery from the trauma. So we also then incorporate the collective efficacy theory which highlights the power of community. So in our groups, we would have healing circles that we used to help people talk about some of the difficult emotions that they were experiencing, but also present their artifact to the rest of the group. And it created this non-threatening way for individuals to connect with one another and to relate to their experiences, which was really powerful. And so by creating those spaces, we can come together collectively to heal together, and we enhance that potential for recovery and transformation. So these two theories are really foundational as they guide the development of this intervention, particularly the expressive arts that we're going to discuss. So that is the theoretical orientation for this work. Now, the core mechanism of action for this intervention lies in the combination of the AI augmented art and expressive components, which are really designed to promote trauma healing. The AI tools provide that individual support, enabling people to create a visual representation of what they are envisioning their future to look like, which can be really difficult to gauge when you have experienced trauma. The expressive arts component also allows participants to process their experiences in a non-threatening medium within a community of people that they feel comfortable with. And through creating that art, they can then explore ways that they express their emotions that might have been previously very difficult for them to articulate out loud. And that process then facilitates the trauma recovery by providing a safe space for creative discovery and expression, as well as having that tangible, piece of art that they can use during their healing journey and remind themselves of that future that they're trying to create for themselves. And so the use of AI in this context helps us enhance the accessibility. It also helps personalize the treatment for the person, and it allows them to engage with the material in a way that resonates with them individually, but then they also connect with the rest of the group and their peers. So the rationale behind using this model for expressive arts and AI trauma healing is rooted in the need for non-threatening mediums where we can learn to express and process our traumatic experiences. Traditional talk therapies may not always be accessible for people, so there may be limitations in terms of how many providers are in your region, whether you have access to healthcare that covers those services. And so those can create barriers for people who need the help but can't afford it. So it becomes a very affordability issue. Traditional talk therapy may not always work for people who have difficulty expressing themselves verbally. So by engaging in these visual and expressive arts, people can then bypass those limitations of language and directly engage with their emotions on a really deep level and then connect with their peers. So that approach provides an alternative pathway to healing where the focus is on creation and expression instead of just verbal recounting of traumatic events. So the integration of our AI further allows people to visualize their healing, their future sense of self in a way that is meaningful to them. And a key component of this approach is using what we call healing circles. And healing circles are small, supportive group settings where people can share their experience, create a safe place and non-judgmental environment for them to unpack some of the harms that have been done to them repeatedly. And that process begins with a grounding exercise. And so as a facilitator, and we're all clinicians, licensed clinicians who do this work, we guide the group in creating that safe space. We set some ground rules, and then we allow them to begin to reflect using some prompts that we've created ahead of time. And so they're encouraged then to reflect on their work and how it represents their journey of healing and their vision of their future self. And our healing circles also provide a communal space for collective healing, for reinforcing those principles of collective efficacy. And they begin to not only learn from that creative process, but they also witness the learning moments and the personal discoveries that are happening with their peers in group. And they're also encouraged to challenge a reality. So asking the question of why can't this vision that I have that I've created through this art exist in the real world? And that can be a very liberating thing to discover, like there is no limitation, that I can in fact do this, and getting the support of their peers in that process can also promote the healing that's taking place. So one of the themes that came up during the healing circles with these youth in Newark was this entrepreneurial mindset. And many of the youth associated their healing and their future success with, financial stability and having those entrepreneurial skills. So the two platforms that we used are called Midjourney, and the second one is Crayon. And these are the ones that we use to literally type in a few keywords to reflect on what their future sense of self would be. And then they are then generating these AI generated images through these platforms. And so for them, it was a really powerful experience for many of the youth. They felt very empowered. That was one of the central components that came up in our groups, not just in an emotional way, but also, tangible and economic outcomes were really important to them in terms of what success meant for them. So that insight really underscores the importance of addressing these economic factors when we are working with trauma recovery, and highlighting how trauma healing can be linked to those broader aspirations, including having financial security and independence. And to facilitate that within our program, we used the two platforms on the screen, Midjourney and Crayon. So Midjourney is an AI-powered art generator that uses prompts to generate really high quality, detailed images that are based on the text that you enter into the system. And so we've guided the youth on how to use this, how to develop their prompts, and how to then visualize their future selves using these images that were created in Midjourney. The second one is Crayon, which is another AI tool, and it generates images from text, but it offers a more playful and accessible interface for the person who's using it. And so that platform was particularly useful for participants who were new to AI tools and didn't have much experience with developing their own prompts. And so these were really central to the intervention that we're trying to create, using technology as the backbone, and then having the youth become more expressive and visual in terms of the healing journey, and have it done in a very personalized and meaningful way. So some of the reflexive techniques that we do are include stress distribution, where we encourage the youth to really think about what do you want your future to look like and how might you get there. And so we focus on this really reflective phase where they're visualizing in great detail what they want their environment to look like. And these images here were generated by the youth during our session. So this was from one healing circle. We asked them, what do you want your trauma healing center to look like? Well, if you had no limitations and no financial constraints, what are some of the things that you would want within your center? And some of them said they wanted a football field within in indoor football fields because of this unsafe environment that they're currently located in within the projects of Newark. And so others really wanted and desired an indoor swimming space. And so these are some of the images that they were able to develop through the AI platform and really see what that would look like and reflect on that. So it really helps promote this idea of a speculative reality where you might have an alternative reality, and it helps you motivate you to really achieve that. It also helps with what we call load transfer. So being able to transfer all of what I'm carrying in terms of the harm that's been done to me, the trauma that I'm carrying with me around in my life, to transfer that out and process it through the work that we're doing and through the visual arts. So working through some of the emotional injury can be a very healing process for those involved. And then expressive art therapy offers a deeply accessible and inclusive approach to healing. It meets the needs of our diverse populations across ages, cultures, and socioeconomic status. It also makes it a very transformative tool, and it's very non-threatening. People are very open to discussing what they've discovered in the platform and sharing it, and it creates this like really nice sense of community within the healing circle. So whether it's a child that's working on creative play and expression, or somebody who's a little older, and that they're able to tap into some of the memories that they had previously, it can be a really integrative experience where they're able to develop this new narrative and be more expressive about what's important to them. This approach is particularly powerful in its ability to help trauma survivors reconnect with their post-trauma identity. So trauma often fragments a person's sense of self and their self-efficacy, as well as their sense of self-esteem. And it leads to emotional stunting or dissociation, where they might feel disconnected from their body and from their entire experience. So expressive art therapy helps provide that safe space for them to process their trauma in a nonverbal embodied way, whether it's through painting, whether it's through movement or music. They have these creative expressions that allow them to reimagine their identity beyond the trauma and foster that emotional growth and possibility for a new future. We also engage them in reflective writing exercises, which is another powerful component of this model. These exercises help encourage our participants to put words to some of the emotions and start naming what happened to them, which can be very freeing and liberating. And writing also allows deep reflection. It helps individual make sense of some of the pain that they've experienced in their inner world, and it helps document the transformation that they're experiencing. So having these reflective journal exercises helps them really with this process, and it also documents the process for them so they can retrieve those later on. This form of expression helps connect the dots between their past trauma and their emerging post-trauma identity. In the healing circles, participants come together in community and they share what they've created together, which is a really core aspect of this approach. In these circles, individuals speak about their creative process and they bear witness to what everyone else has experienced. And so there's a lot of healing that takes place in that shared collective space where they feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel validated by their peers and the clinicians in the room. So that is a really important key element of this model. And there's no right or wrong way to create. We foster a very non-judgmental space in the environment that we create in our healing circle. And it really gives the person a freedom to explore their emotion without fear of failure or fear of judgment. And in doing so, they can then reconnect with their bodies and emotions in ways that feel safe for them, feeling authentic, and have that deep healing take place. And so let's now turn our eyes to the policy implications of integrating AI and expressive arts into trauma care. While these approaches are innovative, they also hold great promise, and they remain out of reach for many people who need them the most, particularly our marginalized communities that face the systemic barriers to healthcare access. Currently, most healthcare policies don't allow for the intersection of technology, arts, and trauma healing, and there's a significant gap between the advancements in these therapeutic tools and the regulations that govern healthcare provision. So to make these therapies accessible to everyone, we need to develop policies that actively support research and development. We need to also be very mindful of allocating funding to these innovative therapies, which could have huge promising potential for those involved. And ensuring equitable access across diverse populations. So we apply a lot of the principles of design justice in our framework. And we take important steps from protecting our participants from harm and centering their voices and elevating their narratives. So design justice emphasizes the inclusion of the marginalized communities in the development of the solution from the very beginning. For example, our policies could support these partnerships between our healthcare providers, the artists, the tech developers, and the youth that are using these tools. And we want to create that holistic trauma healing program where everybody has an equal say in how this is being delivered. They could also require training for therapists and healthcare workers to incorporate these new tools within their practices. And it's critical to look at these ethical concerns surrounding AI use, including the privacy issues, data security, and the risk of the bias in the algorithms. So without our supportive policies, we might risk perpetuating some of the harms that would continue if we're not careful about the ethics. So as we move forward, it's important that we begin to advocate for trauma-informed policies that ensure the equitable access to care and offering opportunities for all to benefit from the healing that could take place within these innovative models. When we consider how to shape trauma healing policies, it's important to address both the technological innovation available to us and the systemic inequalities that continue to drive that trauma. And here I have three key policy recommendations that can help us build a more ethical and inclusive trauma healing approach. So first is prioritizing the funding for AI-powered trauma recovery programs. So AI, we talked about the ways that this could revolutionize trauma care throughout our personalized and adaptive interventions. But without adequate funding, these tools remain out of reach for many people who could benefit from them, especially our underserved communities. So we need policies that invest in these AI-driven trauma recovery programs. Secondly, we want to address systemic inequalities and apply that design justice framework. So trauma is deeply intertwined in the social condition by which people live in, and marginalized communities are impacted by racism, poverty, and violence disproportionately, and so they bear a greater burden as a result. So policies must not only aim to heal trauma, but address the systemic inequalities that create it in the first place. And so this is where design justice frameworks become very crucial. And then our third recommendation is co-designing interventions with our marginalized communities. This is super important that we include them from the very beginning and that their voices are heard. It's essential for creating programs that actually work. So policies should encourage that funding collaborative, and that we are also elevating their experience and their narratives in the very beginning of our design. So as we close, I want to reiterate the key takeaways from our session. Trauma is a very widespread issue, and it affects everyone from all kinds of walks of life. The AI and expressive arts offer innovative approaches to trauma healing with the potential to transform the way we address trauma, both in clinical settings and beyond. However, these tools, in order for them to reach their full potential, we need to have supportive policies that ensure their equitable access and that they address the ethical challenges that are posed by AI. As we move forward, I encourage you to think about how you in your respective fields can advocate for that integration of the tools in trauma care. And thank you so much for your time today. I'm happy to take any questions or to open up a dialogue to hear your thoughts on how AI might be used in your work or in your communities. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amml. Um, before I start with questions, does anyone in the audience have questions? You can put them in the chat again, or you can just say them out loud. Okay, I'll start. So, I'm listening to this presentation. I was wondering, how could someone, like, especially since our community, I'm assuming is largely non-clinicians, um, how could a non-clinician use some of these techniques as a way to either connect with audiences that may be part of these marginalized groups, or may, um, uh, be dealing with like post-traumatic identities, or like as a way um, to sort of like help themselves if they were writing about like a an event that would be considered traumatizing.
Right. So it's beneficial to work. We found that we work with them individually first on a one-to-one basis. So
Mhm.
working at that micro level helps the clinician work with the person individually, and they become more comfortable about expressing some of that painful memory with the clinician. We also do what's called a body scan. So we encourage the person to scan their body and get familiar with some of the sensations that they're feeling from the top of their head, right? Throughout their body, and really encouraging them to explore how their body is communicating to them, things that are very visceral when they have a reaction that their body is actually communicating, this is threatening, that I feel unsafe, and helping them become more um, expressive about some of that pain that they're experiencing under the supervision of the clinician. And so then we're able to unpack that in a way that is comfortable for each individual, because it varies. Each person's at a different stage of their healing. And then they then develop their artwork and, to be healing some of that memory through the expressive art. And then when they're ready, we take them into the group setting and they're able to then connect with others about what they've created and share what they found. And again, we set the rules that this is a very safe place, that there will be no judgment and no tolerance for any kind of inappropriate language used within the group. And they have, I found it to be very powerful and transformative in these healing circles. I hope that addressed your question, Tyler.
Anyone else? Because I'll just keep talking. Okay, I tried. Um, um, and so with your policy recommendations, is there sort of an intersection between um using the AI as like a beneficial tool, but also with the sort of the environmental impacts that sort of like running AI has on the environment?
So there's been a lot of interest lately with the AI, the different intersections of AI, and I've actually attended like a policy forum with the sciences. So a lot of scientists are very concerned about the ethical implications for these tools, particularly the algorithm biases that can happen. And so making sure that we protect the individuals that we use and advocating for policies that do no harm to our populations is really has been an area that I've seen has growing interest and where the focus and the emphasis has been at the moment. So I think that's one area in the policy, social, in terms of social policy and the sciences, where we are very much concerned about, the algorithmic bias that can take place and protecting individuals from harm.
Mhm. Is this like with the do no harm focus, is it currently, is it mostly just based on keeping privacy? Like what are some of the uh like main um ways that maybe do no harm is hopefully being implemented with using these kinds of therapies?
Well, that's a great question, Tyler. So the training models are based on the data that it's being trained on. And so if you don't have diverse perspectives within that data, then you have a very skewed view of what the outcomes can look like using these AI tools. So for example, one of the youth in our group wanted to develop an image for her CD cover, and she wanted to have an African American female with a specific kind of hair texture on the cover of her CD. And when she was putting her prompts in, she was getting very white representations of what that looks like, a female looking who's singing the kind of genre of her music. And so that just points to just one of the areas of bias that can happen is, through these prompt engineering, it's based on what the training models that it's being fed. That's what's coming out of it. And so we had to adjust the keywords that she was using in order to arrive at the desired picture or visual that she was trying to arrive at. And it took several iterations before we got to an image that she was comfortable with and that what she was looking for. So that's just one example of what the algorithm bias can translate into when we're developing images from these platforms.
um we'll see. If anyone, again, if anyone has questions, I don't want to like take up all of it, but I will. um with the what is what was the word, what was my question? Is there possibly thoughts on moving this kind of training or generalizing this kind of training from the sort of clinician mediated practice to a more just like a widespread tool for people?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know if I would recommend that with trauma specifically,
Mhm.
but more of like if it's an expressive form for just the general population. But I think with the trauma impacted community and people who have justice involvement, I think we need to be very careful because there is a need for a trained mental health professional to be guiding them through that work. Otherwise, there can be additional harm that's done in their recovery process. But if it were something more general and not specifically for trauma impacted communities, I think that there's huge potential for people to get like vision boarding almost, right? And have these benefits of visualizing a future for themselves without having that shared trauma experience, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I
Mhm.
think there could be benefits for different populations and different segments outside of the trauma impacted community.
Cool. And Amel, I feel like this is a question I should have asked first, but how did you get into working with AI?
I was at a conference in Phoenix, Arizona, actually, with one of my colleagues, and we were learning about generative AI and the uses of that. And it was very brand new at this time. I think it was in January of like 2022 or 2023, 2023, I believe. And so we were in this a place, and then we were like, well, it would be really cool if we can use this in our own mental health work because we're both clinicians. And how might we use this in the populations that we serve? And so I was like, well, maybe we could use it to help people get in touch with their future sense of self and form that post-trauma identity. And what if we collaborated and did that? And so we began the work immediately after that conference, and we've been building the conceptual model and have been presenting about this ever since. And so it's been really super exciting. And we've had a lot of interest in this idea and the model.
Um, if there was, Mel, if there was sort of one thing that you would like our community of science communicators to take away from sort of this conversation about using AI, what would it be?
Um, that there is being less worried and fearful of the impact is important. I think we need to embrace it because it's here with us. The AI is here, and just being open to different creative ways to use it for societal benefit and for transforming the people that we work with, I think is huge. That there is huge potential, and if we just simply are afraid or cave into those fears, that we're missing this opportunity to advance society forward and to create more innovative solutions to the problems that are facing our communities. So I think just wholeheartedly embracing it and looking at ways we might use it for societal benefit.
And sorry, I have more questions. Um, and I guess would you have any examples of how sort of our non-clinician community could use AI? Maybe not necessarily um, in a way like with this for uh, marginalized identities and trauma, post-trauma identities,
Mhm.
um, but ways that our communities could use them, just as themselves, maybe as students or journalists or just people wanting to communicate to community communities that may be sort of difficult for them to communicate with without this tool.
Yeah, I think that images are super powerful and that a picture is worth like 1,000 words, right? And as cliche as that sounds, I think it's a very powerful thing to, it's a mechanism where if you are looking for an image, instead of, going to Google an image, for example, that you want to use in a PowerPoint or some kind of presentation, or in your line of work, that you could, if you're publishing, for example, an article and you need a stock image, that you could actually create some of this in an AI generating platform like the ones that we're using. And you don't necessarily have to worry about copyrights because it's being developed with using your prompt. And I think these are really practical uses of these technologies and that they could be used for something as simple as like, I need an image for this story. And this could be one way that I do it, and using that to help develop your image for that story could be really, instrumental.
Yeah, we have a question from chat from Lily. So do patients who use these AI tools have a better, more effective experience than those who use more traditional art therapy tools? Um, and an additional is it more rewarding to see a very clear, realistic image representing their trauma versus one created with maybe limited art skills?
That's a great point, Lily. Yes, I think some people are not artistically inclined. And so if you were to ask them to doodle or sketch an image of something that painful that happened to them, it might not, translate into something that's very meaningful or, um, powerful for them. But if they are then trained on how they might express this in certain keywords and then develop an image based on that, then that speaks to them it can help them process what they're going through, some of that pain, and then it gives them something to walk away with, where they've done that load transfer into the art that they're developing, and that can help promote their healing. So I do think that it is effective for them, especially when people have very limited language to use to describe what harm has happened to them through their trauma. That these tools make it more less threatening, and easier for them to talk and express about what they've been through. And I think that is very healing for the individual who's participating. And our traditional therapies, talk therapies, they don't really work for everybody. And so like cognitive behavioral therapy may not be like as effective for somebody who has had this significant involvement with the justice system, and then they aren't really, first of all, they lack trust in you, and so you may not get much meaningful conversation happening through your traditional method with them. But through this, it helps them become more speculative about their future, and create that vision for the future through the art that they develop in our small community. And I think it's really liberating for everybody involved.
So I was going to actually ask about sort of the limitation on vocabulary when you mentioned the limitation of like art skills. Um, so when they're trained on keywords to know sort of how to describe what they want from the AI tool, um, is that training on keywords also with a clinician? Because I imagine that you would have to go through some kind of work to be able to at least verbalize enough
Right.
to get something from the AI, or is it like a cyclical process? Like as you get more keywords, you can get better prompts, and as you get better prompts, you can get more keywords.
It's both, but we do. What my research partner is, he does a lot of the training before the group, and so on the tools and on these generative prompts and how to develop one. We also give them samples to use as well. So we do a lot of modeling and demonstrations and simulations for them to see what this looks like before they get started. And so a lot of that training, I think, is helpful. And to answer your question, yes, it's done by a trained clinician, who is, trauma informed care is very much the way we deliver our services. And so I think that is a super important element in the approach that we take, that we're training the youth on these things before they get started,
Mm.
and using them.
Do you foresee them being sort of um, other ways that AI could be used in this kind of practice? Um, Maybe like outside of the like visual art medium,
Mhm.
maybe with music or something?
Yeah, I think the music is definitely, we do sometimes play music in the background as well while they're doing some of these exercises, especially when we're trying to get them to feel more relaxed in the beginning. But I also think that the narrative writing as well is another expressive art that we use. So writing a story about your self in 2 years and where you want to be, if you had no like limitations, no physical or financial limitations, what is your desired future? What does success look like for you in that world? I think those kinds of exercises really stretch their imagination and create this like alternative reality for them, where anything is possible. And I think that that's a huge motivator when they're constantly bombarded by negative stimuli and just a really difficult and oppressive overall systemic problem that they experience in life. I think that this is a really helpful medium for them to explore things without any barriers in that safe place. Mhm.
And could this also be used for possibly um, patients with different like sensory modalities? So, would there be an option possibly for um, patients who couldn't see, so the visual may not be as.
Right.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's other ways like auditory and other kinds of expressive ways that we can work with somebody who has visual impairments, and to promote their healing in alternative ways. So yes, I think there is multimodal ways that we could do this, without just the visual piece, but more of like the body scans that we do, helping them process some of the trauma, and their senses that are accessible to them. I think those are um, very important avenues to explore as well as we think about this intervention. So thank you, Tyler. That's a great point.
Oh yeah. Well, I just went through all of my my list of questions.
Yeah.
Um does anyone else in the chat have any more questions or comments that they would like to share in these last few minutes of our mentor chat? And if you're typing while you're typing, Amel, again, um, uh, is there anything else that that we should know about um, this AI mediated trauma help?
I am just super excited about it, and I'm very open to collaboration. And anybody that's interested, here is my contact information. You can reach me at my first name, AMML, at bu.edu. And I'm just super excited about the possibilities and the transformation that we can experience throughout society using this kind of a model, that it can really help us individualize and personalize our care, which is much more effective to the individual person. So I'm really hopeful, and I walk away really hopeful and inspired to continue this work moving forward, and to connect with all of you, anyone interested in proceeding with this kind of work.
Thank you, Amel. Um, Thank you everyone for participating in our mentor chat live. Again, this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube in about a week. Our upcoming mentor chats um, will begin in November. On this Thursday, October 24th, we will have a community chat about the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship. So if anyone is interested in that, it is a 10-week summer program that places science, engineering, and mathematics students at media organizations nationwide, where the fellows will use their academic training to research, write, and report on today's headlines, sharpening their abilities to communicate complex scientific issues to the public. The application for that has opened and will be open until January 1st, 2025. We've had a number of PsyCommers apply and participate in this fellowship over the years. And so our community chat on Thursday will bring in previous applicants to talk about sort of their application experience. You can ask for advice. You can learn um, just about how their fellowships went. Um, we will be using the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship Slack channel throughout the application window, so you can ask for peer-to-peer advice. In that you will, gosh, there's so much. In that you can find our previous 2020 mentor chat with AAAS Mass Media Fellows, Luisa Torres, Evelyn Valdez Ward, and Jonathan Wosen. And in that mentor chat, there's also extra insight from Kristen Lewis, who was the former project director for the Mass Media Fellowship. And this Thursday's Mass Media Fellowship community chat will have a panel of fellow PsyCommers, including Brianna Barbu, who was at Discover, Katrina Miller, who was at Wired, and Celia Ford, who was also at Wired in the last couple of years. And we will also be joined by Olivia Monahan, who is the current project director for the Mass Media Fellowship. So if you have questions, Thursday is the day to have them, because all of the answers will be in that Zoom. In November, we will continue our mentor chat series with Dan Pomeroy from the Scientific Citizen Initiative, which is a lab for innovative learning experiences to promote meaningful interactions between science and society. And in December, we will be ending 2024 with a mentor chat about narrative storytelling and persuasion in op-eds with Jean Corbin. Whew, thank you. Again, thank you for everyone who joined. We are also, there's more. We are also doing another giveaway of the book written by our September mentor chat guest, Anthony Dudeau, called Strategic Science Communication. So we will randomly select about 5 SciCommers from this mentor chat Zoom. Um, and if there aren't enough, then we may just combine a couple. And so you can get a free e-version of Anthony's latest book that will also have information and tools on how you can plan for your science communication and practice your science communication. Okay, and now I'm done for real. And again, thank you all for coming. And I will see you all soon. Bye.